Hi, everybody. Welcome to NewsNite for Friday, February 24th. Great to have you with us this week. Big headlines involving a local judge and an area police department. Whom do you believe? We'll talk about it. Is Kelley Williams-Bolar changing her tune pretty late in the game? And we'll take a look at a new children's book that looks at a Northeast Ohio treasure. Those stories and more next on NewsNite. I anticipate great debate tonight, so let's get right to our panel. Great to have with us Phil Trexler here this week from the Akron Beacon-Journal. Great to welcome Bob Dyer to our panel this week, also from the Akron Beacon-Journal. And always great to have freelance journalist and contributor Jody Miller here with us this week. 3 times it made the front page of the Beacon-Journal. Local judge Joy Oldfield caught up in what some would call a scandal, what others would call not news. Phil Trexler, you break the story. Start at the beginning. Why is this newsworthy?
Well, I think it goes to the expectations of conduct among our judicial judges. There's a certain expectation that they behave in a manner that's above the rest of us, that we put them in a position of high power. And along with that, there's certain decorum that I think is expected. And I think that's what the Akron Bar Association is looking at when it comes to municipal court judge Joy Malek Oldfield.
And in a sentence, the story is that she was in a car with a public defender.
Right. She was found at 2 a.m. In a car that smelled of alcohol. According to the Copley police officer, there was a certain amount of clothing that was coming on, changing of seats. The car smelled of alcohol. The judge admitted to be drinking. The public defender, who practices in her court, and I think that's something that's important here. She actually, is peers assigned to her court on a daily basis, was there with her, and it was a public defender who wound up being charged with a drunk driving related offense. Since then, 2 weeks after the event, the public defender, Catherine Loya, has been moved out of the judge's courtroom. And the Akron Bar Association has requested the police documents to begin their investigation to see about the conduct and perhaps breach of ethics.
And the judge is married. Is this newsworthy, Bob?
Absolutely. We had an interesting exchange yesterday via email. I think one of the most significant parts is the conflict of interest. I mean, if you have a judge and, the judge is supposed to be neutral, if you've got one side who are good pals with the judge, I mean, there are 3 ladies involved here. One of them is the lady with the statue with the blind fold on, that the justice is blind. That, even the appearance of that is just reeks.
Newsworthy, Jody?
Well, to deal with what Bob has had to say, but there have been, since this has become news, there have been investigations into whether or not there was any partiality shown in Judge Oldfield's courtroom toward this public defender, and people are saying there has been no misconduct, no partiality shown to, in fact, this public defender. And as Phil stated, the public defender has, in fact, been removed. Whether it's news or not is a debate that could take us the rest of this show and several other shows. What's important in my mind is that the judge herself was not charged with any crime. This was after hours. It obviously did not take place during the court when she was in the courtroom, and there does not appear to have been any kind of partiality, as I said, shown to this public defender.
You don't think it looks horrendous? I know a judge in another county who won't even have a drink in his own county just because of the appearance of it. I mean, that's not the kind of thing you do in your own county if what they say happened.
But again, it was on her own time, private time, and
she is
obviously
a public figure. She doesn't have much own time if she's in her own county.
And she is certainly not the first judge to have done this kind of thing in any way, shape, or form.
I can't remember a story quite like this before.
You can't?
No.
What about the story that you mentioned to me on the email yesterday?
Well, I sort of facetiously said she's given Jim Barbuto a run for her money in terms of the sex scandal.
As I wrote back to you, I think is an egregious and journalistic hyperbole.
Well, it's an exaggeration. That was an email to you.
Because Judge Barbuto, what he did was in his courtroom, and it was a terrible, terrible abuse of justice.
So if the judge would have been caught in the car with a hooker on the sidewalk, parked in front of the studio.
All I'm saying is that there was no crime committed. Okay, there was no crime.
Well, how come somebody's
Whether or
charged,
not her decorum.
How come somebody has a police photo that's run in the paper if there's no crime?
There was no crime committed by the judge. I stand corrected.
Okay,
Well,
so let's just talk about a few of the things here. If there's not the clothes coming on and off, but they're just in the car and one of them's been drinking, is it newsworthy? Is it the sex part that puts this on the front page?
And to add to that question,
Or the
is it
appearance of clothes coming on,
If
putting on
the
the front
judge
page?
had been found in this situation with a man rather than a woman, would it still have been as newsworthy?
absolutely.
Absolutely.
A cop, you're in a parking lot at 2 in the morning and there's alcohol, the cop smells alcohol, and you're a judge and you're in a car with somebody you're not married to, that's not newsworthy?
But my question, though, is why was the initial police report, why did it not go into the details?
Because
that again
It
came
did.
out
Well,
later?
let me clarify that because
Okay.
there's been some debate about that. I talked to Chief Meyer out in Copley. The addendum
Who's standing by his officer,
Who's
right?
standing by his
Okay.
officer. And let me mark first off that the headline was on the first day that the judge is calling out the cop and basically saying that he's making up this story, which, you know,
That's a pretty severe
this is a fair charge that's coming from the judge, that none of this is true, that there was no inappropriate conduct going on. There was a great debate about the timing of the release of this addendum. And I talked to the chief. This addendum was not written 10 days later. It was written the night of the offense. And the chief essentially said that the patrolman was trying to cut the judge a break, not including her on the initial report, but including her in the addendum, which is not necessarily releasable to the public immediately. Once it goes through the court system, that's when it becomes part of the public record, and that's what happened here. So the scandalous part was kept away from the public eye initially, and that's why you didn't hear about it for a couple weeks. But it comes down to, you have a judge here who's calling out a patrolman saying he's making up allegations. That's a very serious charge, and that's why it's the lead of the story, that here we have a sitting judge.
So she wasn't
taking out
reacting to a story, she was creating a story.
Essentially, yeah, she was. I mean, there were other options, and I think that's what's offending law enforcement, and I've heard this throughout the community of police, that they're very upset with the judge and her attorney's comments that this cop would make up this stuff. They question the motivation. Why would a guy who's been on the force 3 years, has an impeccable record, make up some sort of allegation here of misconduct?
But heterosexual, you're still covering the story.
Absolutely, yeah. It has no.
Even without that element you're talking about, it's still newsworthy.
Absolutely, you have a judge basically calling the cop a liar.
Well, I mean, even without subtract that element, you still have a story. You got a judge who's caught up 2 in the morning with somebody
in a car that reeks of alcohol at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's not what you would call judicial.
But this all begins with a police report, and all of us as journalists in this town, I've seen over the times, police reports come to you and you decide whether or not it's a story. Bob, you went through this a decade ago with the police chief. A police report shows up, no charges were filed. Do you run a story? Don't you run a story? How do you debate that as journalists of whether this is a story or not?
Well, again, this is a big-time public figure, the chief of police in Akron. He didn't do anything in his office. At his house, he allegedly, well, more than allegedly, knocked his wife around. To me, that is hugely newsworthy. There's no debate at all.
Even if he's not charged?
If there's a police report with that charge, you run it.
But as we know now in Akron, and we've debated on this broadcast, the new rule is they will take a report on anything. If you claim you saw a UFO, they'll put it in print. Just because it's in a police report, do we always have to run it as news?
Well, I don't know where Jody was 5 years ago when everybody was reporting about Alex Arshnikoff and his issue there, where a police report wasn't even crafted. It was just a little card, and there was no one charged, but yet everyone enjoyed.
And it did, you're right, it did run, absolutely.
And I don't remember you coming to Alex's defense, did you?
I don't think I did. No,
Okay.
not at all. And it's not that I'm coming to the judge's defense. It's just it was off hours. She, in fact, was not charged with the crime. Are judges not supposed to drink?
There are no off hours for judges in their own county. It's a 24-hour-a-day job. If you want to go drink, go to Stark County or go to Cuyahoga County and have somebody drive you to and from.
You have to be concerned about the appearance of impropriety and the appearances.
You're right. You're right.
And being caught in a car at 2 o'clock in the morning, intoxicated or drinking, obviously not well enough to drive, that's a good cause for great concern. And I think it's the appearance of impropriety. I think it's, the breach perhaps of judicial conduct, because the judge is going to be a witness in this public defender's court case, and she allows her to keep practicing in the courtroom for 2 weeks until we started asking questions about it. There is a conflict there. It's clear, and I think Joe Kodish finally acknowledged that. He's moving her out of the courtroom. The judge could be called as a witness in this thing, and there's also this friendship and perhaps giving her rides to work, to and from work, because she felt bad for her for losing her license. I mean, this is not, I think that there's a greater expectation of decorum and conduct that we expect from our judges.
Okay, there's a lot more to discuss on this topic. Let's move the conversation now over to NewsNite.net.
For more NewsNite content, including extended discussions, full interviews, and the chance to speak your mind about the issues, join us online at NewsNite.net.
I have called this the story that will never die, and it's because of incidents like this. Kelley Williams-Bolar putting herself back in the headlines this week. She'll take part in a rally in Cleveland on Sunday for education choice. In other words, that maybe the public schools aren't the best option. And Bob, she now hints through a press release that maybe she was a little upset with the Akron Public Schools, that they weren't a great place for her kids, when she said all along that she wasn't. This soap opera just is not going to end.
No, it won't. And it's just, I mean, if it weren't so sad, it would be hilarious. I mean, here's this woman. Now, we got a news release the other day that said, that pointed out that this is Black History Month and this is a civil rights issue, her not being able to falsify all her documents. I mean, 3 times she has formally accused people of racism in this case. She asked the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to look into this. They said there's no racism going on here. You were treated exactly, I mean, there were a whole group of people who did similar things to what you did. When they were confronted, they backed off. You were the one who took it to the mat. She also filed in Summit County Common Pleas Court saying that the only reason that you were going after her is because of her race. And then she and her father filed in U.S. District Court saying this is a racial issue. And everybody who looked at it said there's no way, it has nothing to do with race. I sat across from Al Sharpton on Dr. Phil's show. Sharpton ridiculed me for saying it was a racial issue. Why are you bringing race into this thing? Well, your woman brought it in repeatedly, and now they're putting out news releases that say, well, this is clearly a racial
So is she
injustice.
changing her tune, though, about whether...
She's changing her tune about everything. I mean, when you spend your life lying, you tend to change your tune a lot.
Jody.
Well, the interesting thing is, of course, during the entire fuss about Kelley Williams-Bolar, her contention during this entire case was that she was worried about the safety of the neighborhood, which was why she wanted her kids to go to a different school district so that they could stay at their father's house, or her father's house. Now she's coming out and with this forum in Cleveland on Sunday, supposedly it's all going to be about the quality of education and the choice of education. And this is a woman who at the same time, that this was all going on, was working for the Akron Public Schools. So she continues to work for the Akron Public Schools, and now she's saying that her children didn't get the quality of education that they needed to get in the Akron Public Schools.
Phil, could you go on to a forum somewhere and say that the Beacon Journal isn't a great paper, that you should look for your news elsewhere and get away with it?
No,
and have a job
certainly
the
not.
next day?
What I found most interesting about this is how history is changing, how the story is now being portrayed as she was denied the right to a safe environment to put her kids in the school, saying that Akron Public Schools are not safe, essentially, and that's why she wanted it, and that all kids should have access. It's just amazing that the history is changing, and the national perception of Kelley Williams-Bolar is far more flattering than it is locally.
Well, they got it absolutely wrong from day one.
Absolutely, and they're not going to change it. It seems as though there's an agenda here. It seems as though there's a story that the national folks want to fit, and they want to squeeze this square peg into the round circle that that is Kelley Bolar, and to hell with the truth, and let's just move forward. She's going to be our poster child, and
let's not forget that it was our governor who, in fact, once she had been charged and convicted of these misdemeanor accounts, felony accounts, because it was tampering with records, if I'm not mistaken.
It was falsifying any number of records.
Okay, but it was our governor who then commuted that sentence, who all of a sudden reduced that to misdemeanors. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that gave a lot more credence to her story and her plight in the national media than it did locally.
That was 9 months after the story broke, and that was him reacting to the national perception that she'd been this poor mother who was just trying to get her daughters a better education. I mean, I went on a Fox News show where the interviewer kept referring to Copley, Ohio. And she kept shouting me down, telling me, that's not what happened, this is what happened. She wanted a better education. She couldn't even pronounce the town right. So these people at the national level want, as you said, they want this story. This is a great story, this poor downtrodden mother just fighting for her kids. That is not what happened.
I was at the hearing among the parole board because the governor first tried to get the parole board to take the heat for him. They voted unanimously against giving her any consideration, and the governor ignored it anyway. And they looked at it and they interviewed her, and it was quite the ordeal to go through.
They looked at it for weeks and weeks and weeks. He took Labor Day weekend and said, "Nah." My impression was that she.
But she was asked directly, "Did you do this because you didn't think your kids were getting a good education in Akron?" She goes, "No, they're getting a great education in Akron. I was worried about the safety, and I went to these extreme measures." So to change her tune now, is she jeopardizing her, employment? At some point, the Akron Public Schools have to go, "Hey, there's free speech," and then there's just crossing the line with your employer.
She'll have a new job touring the country talking about school inequality. I mean, she's on her way.
Let's face it, too, is that when all this was going down, she didn't lose her job. After she was convicted of a felony, she didn't lose her job. Even after the governor did what he did, she still maintained her employment. I don't know what she needs to do to lose her job. She seems like she's in a good setting there.
But don't forget, at that point, she never at any time during this whole thing, until now, said that her children were not getting a good quality education in Akron. And now it's like she's impugning the ability of the schools where she now works.
Right. And you see this in a lot of instances where history is sort of changed to meet a certain agenda. It happened, I think, with Hurricane Carter, who was, the boxer in prison, and he's, portrayed as this wrongly convicted man, blah, 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 who rose, to great heights. And it makes for a better story, I think, in the national media, to make it look as though she's been portray her as a poor mother who was denied the opportunity to fight for her children's safety.
We listened to a lot of phone calls when she was in jail that were recorded. One of them, I know she's talking to another woman about, make sure we get paid. If we're doing any interviews, make sure we're getting paid to do these interviews. But she's doing this, it sounds like, for free. Does she realize she's being used? Or is she just along for the ride because she loves the notoriety? Because
she thinks this is her ticket to ride here. I mean, she gets in a couple groups as a spokesperson. Next thing you know, she's touring the country, getting paid for that.
Writing a book, going on talk shows.
The jailhouse phone conversations between her and her father, he was gloating about how, you're going to make more money from this than you'll ever make teaching. I mean, we have CDs of the phone conversations. I mean, he was ecstatic about the publicity. There was actually an animated cartoon in Taiwan about this situation, where this poor woman's walking down the street and this big cage comes down over her. I mean, it's grown just wings that'll never stop.
I'm sorry, but this whole thing goes back to that jail sentence that she got that she didn't deserve. It was kind of a gratuitous 10-day jail sentence. If she was not placed in jail for those she did 9 days, I don't know that we'd be talking about this. But the fact that she was incarcerated for 9 days, to me, that's a symbol. This whole thing.
We discussed this ad nauseum when this happened, and you completely disagreed with that, and I completely thought that the judge was well within her right to give this woman the sentence that she did. She could have gotten much longer, Phil.
She was convicted.
That sentence was pandering.
She was convicted of felonies by a jury of her peers.
Then give her 6 months. What's 9 days? That's just gratuitous.
It's saying you don't just walk away from something like this and you're falsifying documents.
But what that did, it proved nothing, except the county had to feed her for 9 days. But it gave. There's now you have these photos of this poor mother being carted off to jail. You have the jailhouse interviews that she gave, dressed in the black and white. It gave an image.
She was a felon.
It changed from mother convicted to mother jailed. I'm just saying that ignited this whole thing.
Felonies, you just say,
they get probation all the time. They get probation all the time, first time offender. And that's what she was, first time offender. And it was just the sentence. I'm saying. It's all history now, but I'm saying that's what triggered this whole
plea bargain. You got to have two sides willing to bargain. She maintained her innocence right up to the end. She would not plea bargain. She said,
9 days in jails is just silly. I mean, either give her a real sentence or no sentence at all.
There was also one of the worst things she did was at one point when she was contacted by the Copley schools to pay up for the tuition that she owed them. Wasn't there an envelope that came to her house that she sent back when she wrote that she was deployed overseas? I mean, come on. Right. This is not a woman who deals with...
There's no question she was lying.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying 9 days is just silly.
All right, I want to let you guys finish this because I think there's some things to wrap up. We're going to go ahead in the next segment and talk about a book that Jody has a story on, but I'll go ahead and thank Bob and Phil now as we move the conversation over to NewsNite.net.
On NewsNite.net, we cover a broader range of topics than we can on the air in 27 minutes. Be part of the conversation on our Facebook page and at NewsNite.net.
We leave you tonight with a special event that occurred earlier this month down in Stark County. And Jody, you're going to tell us all about it.
I am, and thanks, Eric. You, as well as our viewers, know how passionate I am about the people, places, and things that are really treasures in Northeast Ohio. And one of those treasures is now the focus of a children's book, Twice as Good, about the Clearview Golf Club and William Powell down in Stark County, in East Canton in Stark County. My colleague Larry Baker and I were down there to cover the 3 days of events, and we prepared this video for you. And I do want viewers to know that if they have more questions about the video or about the book, we are going to have links on our website to all of that information. So I hope you enjoy this story about one of Northeast Ohio's treasures. Determination, quiet dignity, and his East Canton Clearview Golf Course were how the late William Powell changed the world. His inspirational story was recently celebrated during 3 days of Stark County events for the launch of Twice as Good, a children's book about a little boy who wouldn't take no for an answer.
Willie Powell was fast. He was only in 3rd grade, and he could run across the playground faster than most 5th graders. But the new golf course was 7 miles outside of town.
The book Twice as Good, it's the story of William Powell. It's the only golf course designed, built, and owned by an African American in this country, and actually anywhere.
What brought me into the story was learning about this family man, was learning about somebody who could look at the world that in many ways served them nothing but difficulty, and turn everything that came his way into a positive, and with determination.
I believe the author, Rich Michelson, had heard about my dad or read about my dad, and was, I think, probably fascinated by the fact and inspired by the fact of who he was and what he did, and when he did it, how he did it.
I seem to be attracted to people who break the rules. I'm not great at following rules myself, and I find people who are told no and yet continue to believe in what they think is right and continue to follow their own dream.
Finally, Willie just set his ball on the first tee and took a swing. The ball rose like a shooting star high into the sky.
The other thing that really attracted me to William Powell's story is he was someone who followed his great dream at a time when it was not a dream for African Americans to play golf. But it's what he wanted to do, and he refused to take no for an answer. And yet, he also had a very close family, and he remembered where he came from. And I think that that's a lesson for children, for adults, for everyone. And for me, both sides of that story resonated and made me want to tell it.
During author Rich Michelson's visit to Canton, he told that story for the first time to local children.
His school principal had told him, if you're going to go get ahead in this world, Willie, you can't be as good as the white children. You have to be twice as good. A story, I think, is integral to us as people. And so the stories that interest me tend to be stories about people who changed the world, who were unwilling to follow the status quo.
And determined to change that status quo in the 1940s, William Powell set out to build a golf course.
People thought he was crazy, whites and blacks as well. He was out there doing it himself, working on the ground for 2 years, building this course by hand. And so the challenge for me is to put people back in that time frame, to realize what a difference he made.
I don't think my dad ever looked at the fact that he was a pioneer. I think that he just looked at things that when he saw injustice, then he tried to make a change. He tried to make it just. When he saw, something wasn't fair, he tried to bring the fair back into things.
Twice as Good tells Willie Powell's story, and not just through words.
The illustrator's function is really to help the reader better understand the story by providing the images. I was really surprised and really inspired by his story when I read Rich's manuscript, and then going to Clearview, it was almost like a spiritual epiphany for me. because once you stand right there in the middle of the field, and you see what one man created with his own 2 hands in 2 years, you know, you're moved, and that's what I wanted to convey in the story.
Twice as Good debuted in William Powell's hometown of Canton.
This will certainly raise a bit of an awareness about my dad and the family and about Clearview and the Clearview Legacy Foundation.
Author, illustrator, and daughter read, lectured, displayed artwork, and signed copies of Twice as Good at Walsh University, at local schools, at the Canton Museum of Art, and at the Stark County District Library. And children throughout the community learned a little bit about the game that Willie Powell so loved, and they learned the lessons of his life.
I think this book can teach children a lot about life. It can teach them a never give up attitude.
Just because I'm black does not mean I cannot do what I feel like doing, and it's my dream, so I think I may follow it, please.
I know how black people weren't accepted because of their color, but I like how Will never gave up of what he believed in.
Just because you're a different color doesn't make you different from anybody else. And what I learned about him is that just because he was black and he wanted to play golf and they told him he couldn't, he still did it. And he tried as hard as he could.
Follow your dreams. Don't forget where you came from. Be true to who you were while fashioning who you can become.
So what I learned about this book is no matter what anybody say, you can still do it. All you do is gotta reach for your star.
And in reaching for his stars, William Powell created a legacy.
In 2001, Clearview was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in that same year it became a foundation. So it is now the Clearview Legacy Foundation for Education, Preservation, and Research, turfgrass research. The courses now, basically, we function mostly on donations and fundraising events.
It's known around the world, and it's known around the country. It happened here.
This is America's cars, Willie answered proudly. The only color that matters here is the color of the green.
I think what's good about this book is one of the things is telling children what people have gone through, how he really did help to change a lot of things because he was part of that whole civil rights movement. You know, he was pre-civil rights movement and during and after.
And I think that this is a perfect story, and the man who lived this story refused to hear the naysayers.
My dad, he taught people with such dignity and such grace.